Thanks, Ross. Yeah, like Ross said, this is I Want to Cry, a history of malware. For those of you that are unaware, I was drafted in to fill in for a speaker that dropped out. I was sitting at home a couple of weeks ago watching House, and Ross messaged me and he said, "Jack, we need a speaker. Will you fill in?" So I said, "Yeah, of course. How long have I got?" He said, "2 weeks." I went, "Oh fuck." So yeah, the talk might be a little rough around the edges because it was hastily thrown together, but over the course of the next half an hour or so, I am going to roll back the years and take you on a journey where together we'll learn how malware has evolved since its inception in 1971 to where we are today. Obviously, I've only got half an hour and I only had 2 weeks to write this, so I couldn't include everything in the talk. And the things I did include, I don't have the time to go into every detail, but I hope it'll still prove interesting and educational and give you an idea of how we came from a non-malicious malware to the risks we face today. So first, a little bit about me. I'm a third-year ethical hacking student here at Securi-Tay. I am a former world record holder. I was in the world's largest Cayley band with 280 musicians until that was broken in Ireland last year. Bastards. I formerly trained as a professional wrestler. I'm a keen amateur musician. You can catch me at various pubs around Dundee performing. I played darts badly, and perhaps most importantly, I'm a volunteer at Securi-Tay this year. You might have seen me wearing a volunteer t-shirt earlier on. This is because I wasn't even a reserve speaker. I didn't have the intention of talking at all, hence the requirement for a quick costume change. So with that out of the way, let's make a start on the presentation. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that you all have at least an understanding of what malware is, so I won't go into the usual what is malware. What I will do is give you the chance to perhaps show off your knowledge to any others in the room and ask, does anyone know why it's possibly called I Want to Cry, this presentation? Yeah, exactly right. Exactly, yeah. It is titled I Want to Cry in a poor attempt at foreshadowing what's to come. So yeah, it's a reference to the WannaCry malware, which we'll learn a little bit more about later on. So now I want to take you back to 1966. I'm sure none of us remember that year particularly well, where the theory of self-reproducing automata by the great John von Neumann of the von Neumann architecture was posthumously published. This work contained the idea that computer programs could be made to reproduce themselves and then spread themselves. 5 years later, in 1971, von Neumann was proven right as the creeper virus was born. This virus wasn't harmful. It was purely a proof of concept. It was written by a gentleman called Bob Thomas, and it could reproduce itself and move from computer to computer across the ARPANET, a network system that laid the foundation for the internet that we know today. Upon becoming infected, a computer would simply display, "I'm the creeper, catch me if you can." Upon development of this, a man named Ray Tomlinson, known for implementing the first email system on the ARPANET, created a program called Reaper. This program moved across computers just as Creeper did and was specifically designed to eliminate Creeper from any computers, which effectively marked it as the first form of antivirus. So next, on to 1986, we have the brain virus. This malware targeted IBM PCs, and it was the very first virus to conceal itself. This was done using manipulating the BIOS calls on the system. This virus, once on the machine, targeted the boot sector of a floppy disk. Once there, it replaced the boot sector with a copy of itself in order to achieve persistence and then to replicate itself. As a result of this, obviously, it slowed down the floppy disk. This virus was written by two brothers who made it with the intention of tracking down copyright infringement. It was supposed to stop illegal copies of a medical program being distributed, and it did this by infecting any other floppy disks that connected to the machine that had the pirated software. It didn't destroy any of these machines, it just slowed them down, and then it displayed the details, the contact details of the brothers who wrote it on the screen so that people could contact them and get their system put back to normal, and thus tracking the copyright infringement. So this originated in Pakistan, but very, very quickly spread to the rest of the world. The virus, while not harmful in itself, did two things. One, it proved that programs could be written that infected other machines and then reproduced themselves. And two, it changed public perception of malware from something that only happened to very technical users to something that could happen to ordinary users as well. Now, following on from the revelation that programs could spread from computer to computer, the Morris worm was born. Created by student Robert Morris in 1988, this worm was intended to be another proof of concept, just like Creeper was. And by all means, the proof of concept was successful. almost too successful. This proof of concept was designed to exploit a backdoor present on Unix systems, and then post-exploitation, it was meant to keep itself hidden and to spread further. Because this happened in 1988, networks had advanced since the Creeper or the Brain viruses. Worms didn't need floppy disks to spread to computers. They could spread over networks closer to what we know as the internet. Unfortunately, in its early stage, this system of networks often had no security. This worm took advantage of the fact that often there were no password requirements set on networks, and well, you might be thinking, okay, sounds pretty malicious, but Morris said he didn't intend for the worm to be destructive, just to prove the weaknesses present in many systems. The initial idea was to use the worm to test how many computers were infected, but Morris was worried that this could possibly lead to false positives. So to mitigate this, the worm was programmed to reproduce itself 14% of the time, regardless of whether or not the target computer was already infected. This led to machines being infected multiple times. And you might be thinking, well, doesn't sound as if it actually performed any malicious actions, and you'd be both right and wrong. It didn't perform any malicious actions directly. Instead, it unintentionally ate up a lot of memory on computers that resulted from it copying itself from machine to machine. In 1988, the internet was not widely used. I mean, not by today's standards. Only about 60,000 machines had access to the network. Of that 60,000, most of them either belonged to universities or the military. And as a result of eating up a lot of memory, this worm brought these computers screeching to a halt. So, in other words, it crashed the military computers. From what I understand, they weren't best pleased about this. This was classed as the world's first widespread internet cyber attack, and Morris was the first to be convicted of cyber fraud in the United States, because essentially he'd unintentionally DDoSed the United States Armed Forces. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 400 hours of community service, and fined, which is extraordinarily lenient by today's standards. Possibly because it was the first case of its kind, possibly because there was no malice behind the attack. So moving into the start of the millennium, we have a more widely known malware, the I Love You virus. With the internet becoming more widely used, it was a perfect time for malware to spread further than ever. Sometimes known as the love bug or the love letter, the I Love You virus, even though it was technically a worm, was an early instance that resembles what most of us might think of when we think of malware today. The I Love You virus was created by Onel de Guzman, a student in the Philippines, for his undergraduate thesis. And this worm, while very simple, was very, very effective. And the reason for this, it played on human curiosity, because this worm was spread via email, but it wasn't the email itself that caused the problem. The problem lay within the attachment. So, okay, fairly simple. Don't open the attachment. Well, back then, people were a lot less cyber aware. The attachment was also fairly enticing because the subject line of the email was I love you, and the attachment was called love letter for you. So the people that received these emails felt, understandably, compelled to open the email and read the attachment just to see what it was. And unfortunately, opening this attachment did two things. One, it collected all email addresses on a computer and sent the same email containing this attachment to every address on that computer. Then it got a list of addresses on the next computer and sent it on, and so on. The second thing it did was it deleted certain files and stole passwords on any machine that it was connected to, marking it as the first significant piece of outright malicious software. So with these two things connected, you can understand how this could cause just absolute chaos. This worm even shut down UK Parliament at one point. It's estimated that the worm reached around 45 million users and caused around $10 billion in damages. And despite this, Guzman was never actually charged with a crime because at this point there were no laws against malware in the Philippines. And on the screen there is a little graphic taken from Shutterstock that just shows how quickly this could spread. So 16 years later, technology has advanced rapidly. In 2016, a family of malware appeared called Petya. Interestingly, this was named Petya after the satellite from the Bond film GoldenEye. Now, I say family of malware, and I say this because there were different variants of this particular piece of malware. The first variant of the strain was simply called Petya. This strain was ransomware. It encrypts any files on the system and demands payment with the threat that files will be permanently deleted if payment's not received. Petya was spread through emails, much like the I Love You virus, and was transferred onto machines through an attached PDF. From then, it targeted the master boot record to encrypt the files on the machine. Now, that's a big jump from the I Love You virus. So the question is, how does the ransomware work? Well, the answer lies in something that some of you may already know about, something called Eternal Blue. Eternal Blue is an exploit that was ironically created by the National Security Agency. The exploit uses the SMB protocol, specifically SMB version 1, which basically tricks machines into allowing untrusted data on the network. This data could contain malicious programs, and in our case of Petya, it did contain a malicious program. Moving on from what was a short and unfinished case study of Petya, we moved to the title of the talk, the 2017 WannaCry malware. But don't worry though, don't panic, we'll come back to Petya very soon. WannaCry was a malware the likes of which had never been seen before. This ransomware affected people around the globe. One of the most notable victims of the malware was the NHS. All of their files were encrypted and held under ransom, and again, this used the Eternal Blue exploit. A lot of the NHS systems were very old and therefore vulnerable to Eternal Blue. This malware was catastrophic. I'm sure you remember the attack against the NHS. And fortunately for us, the damage caused was rather short-lived, because while the malware was a devastating program, it had a rather interesting design choice. You may remember that a gentleman called Marcus Hutchins managed to disable the ransomware. This is basically a fancy way of saying he switched it off. WannaCry had a kill switch embedded in it. This switch took the form of a URL. If the malware could connect to the URL, it stopped. So Hutchins hosted the URL and indeed stopped the malware. Well, the malware still spread, but it didn't actually execute because it could connect to the URL. The exact reason for this isn't known, but it's theorized that it was used to check if the malware was running in a safe environment, like a testing environment. Perhaps it was supposed to be removed before the ransomware went live. Either that, or they took a whole new meaning to testing in production. There is another interesting sort of feature of WannaCry. The encryption keys used on the files were made using prime numbers. Okay, so what? Well, WannaCry deleted the encryption keys used to encrypt the files to make decryption impossible. Okay, so what? Well, this ransomware invokes a function that, at least on Windows 10, cleans up the memory after it was run. On Windows XP, however, it doesn't do that. Which means if any NHS systems were using Windows XP, which some were, the prime numbers were still in the memory and the files could have been recovered. So next on the journey, we return to our old friend Petya. Remember I said Petya was a family of malware. That means there was more than one strain. The particular strain I spoke about just a moment ago isn't very notable. The next strain, however, more so. So upon infection of this strain, the malware resembled the Petya strain I briefly mentioned. So we've had WannaCry by this point, that's been and gone. So we're experiencing a new ransomware attack so soon after the last one? No, not quite. This was different. It was like the Petya strain, but it was not Petya. And I mean that literally, because to differentiate from the previous Petya attack, this strain was called not Petya, which I think is a clever disguise. I mean, they'll never suspect a thing. I suppose I better tell you what the main difference was. So if you remember, Petya encrypted files and held them under ransom. NotPetya certainly appeared to do this as well, with one critical difference. NotPetya was destructive. The addresses to pay the ransoms to were fake. NotPetya was not ransomware. It was a program that infected and destroyed drives on the machine, rendering their machines unusable. It was a destructive program running under the guise of malware. So, what exploit does this malware use, do you reckon? Yeah, it was Eternal Blue. Unlike WannaCry, there was not one single solution to stopping this malware. Instead, it was discovered that user files could be protected by quickly shutting a PC down before Windows booted, because this malware forced a system reboot. System admins were also able to create a certain file that, if it was discovered by NotPetya, the encryption was stopped, which is similar to the kill switch used by WannaCry, but required action on the user's end. This attack was blamed on the Russian government. Nobody claimed responsibility, but it was traced back to a group of hackers of the Russian military. Whoever was responsible, they caused billions in damages, and it's one of the worst cyber attacks to date. So finally, we're almost caught up to the present day. My last piece of malware here is something called WannaMine. It's the year 2018. We've had WannaCry, we've had NotPetya, and now we have WannaMine. Similarly to WannaCry and NotPetya, this also uses the Eternal Blue exploit. Unlike the previous attacks, however, WannaMine takes control of the emerging technology of the time of cryptocurrency. WannaMine was a cryptojacker, essentially a program set up to mine cryptocurrency. The program was used to mine crypto on machines belonging to other people in order to mine crypto effectively for free. I mean, the resources being used were that of the victim's machines. Unfortunately, I am just about out of time, and we've come to the end of the journey. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought. What does the future of malware hold? Obviously, we have AI. AI could create phishing emails far more dangerous and realistic than phishing emails we have today. They could personalize a message and make it seem like a genuine email. I mean, the victim might not suspect a thing. AI could create malware that's self-learning. It could create malware to take note of its situation and circumstances and adapt on the fly to evade detection, which is a particularly scary one. There are tools that already exist for this, WormGPT and FraudGPT, AI models specifically designed for cybercrime, and we might be seeing a lot of these in the future. We could have malware that uses native tooling in its path of destruction to evade detection completely, possibly fileless malware. I mean, you can't look for things that aren't there. Well, you can, but you've got a better chance of finding Lord Lucan riding on Shergar. We could have quantum computing generated malware. This, honestly, is a topic I don't even fully understand, but could definitely be a threat in the future. Encryption keys could be created using quantum computing that would be impossible to decrypt because of the sheer power and mathematics involved. Quantum computing could be used to obfuscate data, making it impossible to crack, keeping the encryption key in a quantum state, and would completely collapse when analyzed. We could even have simple brute force attacks carried out with ease with the power of quantum computing. Moving past that confusing rabbit hole, we move on to the Internet of Things. Everyday devices are becoming increasingly connected to the internet. Things that previously weren't even thought of, like fridges. What if a car was able to be infected with malware that took over the controls, or that it blew up if it went under 50 miles an hour? Malware could evolve to infect things we haven't even thought of yet. Finally, and here's a different one, malware could be encoded in DNA. Scientists have recently been able to hack into computers using DNA. There haven't been many studies about this, so there's not really a lot of information, but it's something that has happened. This seems incredibly far-fetched and will be some time away, but I will reiterate, it's already happened. Scientists used a strand of DNA to encode binary digits. With that being my final thoughts, I would like to thank you all very much for listening and open the floor for any questions anyone might have. Just please don't ask me about quantum computing. Yes.
You talked a little about like the methods that things might start using in the future.
Yeah.
But the purpose has also changed.
Yeah.
So from kind of fun through to ruining someone's day through making money. What are your thoughts on what the future purpose might be?
Honestly, the future purpose could be things that don't exist just now. We are starting to see things come through that are targeting things with political agenda. I mean, we've had ransomware for a while now, so perhaps something like the crypto miner could take place. Things like blockchain, Ethereum, things that are becoming more popular. But in short, I'm not sure. I'll have to wait and see. Thanks. Good. Thank you.